Her marriage itself was orchestrated in the heavens above. Born from an affluent family, she sprouted from greatness. She was known for her generosity, spirituality, kindness, and devotion. Unmatched, which is why it was important that she be married to the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. Although she was short in stature, the Prophet himself said amongst the mother of the believers she would meet him first who had the longest arms, which spoke volumes in regards to her generosity. Her name was Zaynab Bint Jahsh. Join host lailanasheeba on another exciting installment in the Heroines of Islam series, every Monday and Wednesday 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, right here on Sunnahfollowers.
Alhamdulillah, wa salat wa salam ala wa rasulullah. Welcome to our series that's become quite popular lately. This is our series on the heroines of Islam. And in this series, what I'm doing is taking you on a journey into the lives of the female companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we always begin with the stories of his wives, because after all, they were his wives and they are the mothers of the believers. Okay. And we talked about the story of Khadija radiallahu anha. And we talked about how her marriage to the Prophet was as perfect as it'll ever get. It won't get no better than that. Then we did the story of Sauda, the story of sacrifice for Allah. Then the story of Aisha radiallahu anha, the story of love and how relationships, are a push and pull when there's passionate love involved. And then we talked about the story of Hafsa, a story of how when we enter into marriage, we enter into relationships of marriage, how we have to work on changing the condition of ourselves into that which is livable, okay? Controlling your anger. Just like with Aisha, radiallahu anha, it was a test for the Prophet, to try to get her to understand that when a woman marries a man, you are a representative of him. And there are some things that you're going to have to do without. There are some sacrifices that we women will have to make as representatives of the men who we marry, especially if we marry men of authority, men of affluence, men of power. And this is what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had to teach his two wives, Aisha radiallahu anha and Hafsa radiallahu anha, that they had to give up their desire for worldly things. Not because they couldn't afford them, because these women did not come from poor backgrounds, none of them. But for the sake that you're married to me, he would tell them, you're married to me and I am a prophet of Allah. How can I teach the people and warn the people and advise the people to not indulge in the life of this world if you, my wives, want me to give you all these nice accommodations? So again, when you look at the story of Aisha radiallahu anha and Hafsa, you realize that these two marriages show how, as women, sometimes we have to make that sacrifice, because remember, men are the leaders over women. It's his job, to lead you. He's your guardian over you. So you may have to give up some things because of his reputation, his stature. And I hope you sisters understand that. Even a woman like myself, I'm a woman of empowerment, but I am a single woman of empowerment. So I can sit here on this internet and spend all my time doing what I do. But do you sisters think that if I were married, I could sit here all day and night like this? Get real. Oh no. Oh no. I wouldn't be able to do this because my husband would have rights over me. Okay? And my husband would want me to help him. So again, guys, I want all you women listening to me that from the stories of these female companions, from the stories of the wives of the prophet, we learn how to strengthen and better our marriage relationships. The same way they had to sacrifice and give, we have to do the same. Okay, then we did the story of Salama, radiallahu anha. Salama, she was a woman of peace. Why? Because the prophet prayed for her. The prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made dua asking Allah to rid her heart of jealousy, to rid her heart of female drama. And by him making that dua for her, Allah gave her that. And Salama became that source of peace for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Her home is where he could go to relax, to clear his head, and to also strategize with her because she was extremely, extremely, extremely intelligent, even more so than Aisha because she was older and she could strategize. And she was the one who became his counselor, his war counselor, because she was the cousin of Khalid bin Walid. And he and her were trained in the art of warfare. And so the prophet could seek solace with Salama. And also he could seek counsel and advice from her. She could soothe away his fears the way Khadijah radiallahu anha did. And we notice that all these wives that the prophet married after Khadijah had excerpts of her about them. The prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't need another wife when he was married to Khadijah because Khadijah was the second most perfect woman Allah ever created. She gave him everything that any man could need. There was no need for him to take on any other wives. But after her death, she could never be replaced. So he had to marry different women who had different components of her character, of her being within them. And all those other wives made up one Khadijah, radiallahu anha. May Allah, make us all good wives for our husbands. Ameen. Okay. So after doing the story of Salama, this is when we embark upon the next wife who he married right after Salama. And that woman was Zaynab, radiallahu anha. We talked about how Zaynab was the prophet's first cousin. And it is said that she's the most beautiful. She was the most beautiful of all his wives. They said that all his wives were beautiful, but the top three were Aisha, Salama, and Zaynab. Zaynab was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's first cousin. Her mother was the sister of the Prophet Muhammad's father. Aisha, radiallahu anha, said she had a hatred and a jealousy for Zaynab because Zaynab was beautiful. She looked like the prophet. And as handsome as he was, she was his first cousin. So, she had to be pretty beautiful too. Okay. And Aisha claims out of all the wives, yes, Salama was beautiful too. And Aisha had a jealousy for her, but she had a fear of Salama because Salama was a lioness. She was a warrior, skilled with the sword like her cousin Khalid bin Walid. Salama was a powerful woman. She had a strong voice. She feared nobody. Aisha knew not to mess with her. When he married Salama, the first thing she did was march to Aisha's house, knock on her door, and say, I heard you are the little girl who likes to keep drama going. She said, well, I'm introducing you. I'm the wife who ain't going to tolerate no drama. She said, you and Hafsa don't pull me in none of your stuff. You see my house right there? That's my house. Don't pull me in it. And Aisha and Hafsa backed away. Oh, yes. Nobody bothered Salama, the lioness of Allah. Okay? But Zaynab, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had his eye on Zaynab for a long time. He and Zaynab grew up together. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had wanted to marry her. Always had wanted to marry her, but he just never, got around to it. And Zaynab always wanted to marry him. So Zaynab remained a virgin because her family had already decided that the man who would marry her was Muhammad ibn Abdullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So she saved herself for him and patiently waited for him to come with a proposal for her. And we talked about how one day the Prophet did come with the proposal. Her family was so excited because they thought, finally, we can get these two married. But they were shocked when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam informed them that the proposal was not for him, but he was proposing that she marry his adopted son, Zayd. And that's when her family were shocked. They said, our daughter is a noble woman. She's wealthy, come from a wealthy family. We can't marry her to him. He's an ex-slave. He's poor. He's ugly. He has nothing. And at this time, Zayd was married to Ayman, who was the woman that raised the Prophet, Barakah. They said, we refuse. We're not giving her to him. We thought you came asking for her for yourself. And that's when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam explained to Zaynab's family. He said, I am trying to unite the Muslims. I am trying to teach that Islam is a way of life that teaches justice and equality. He said, all this tribal warfare, you got this tribe fighting this tribe, hating this tribe, holding petty grudges over things that happened centuries ago. He said, I want to teach you all that in Islam, it's not the money, it's not your status that matters to Allah. It's your belief in Allah and your good deeds. So I want to make that precedent with Zaynab, who I know believes in Allah, and also with Zayd, my adopted son who believes in Allah. I would love for them to marry. They would set the precedent. So that's what the Prophet had hoped to accomplish. At first, her family refused, but then Allah sent down verses of the Quran speaking about how we should be together, united, el-wala. The verses of el-wala and wal-bara. Okay? And so Zaynab, being a strong believer that she was, she said, if Allah wants me to marry him and you want me to marry him, then I'll marry him, even though she didn't want to. And by the way, Zayd didn't want to marry her either because Zayd knew that she was out of his league. She was a high maintenance woman. And Zayd was a poor man, but they both married, for the sake of Allah. And that's an example of how sometimes we find ourselves in situations where we do things for the sake of Allah. It's not personal, it's what Allah wants. So they made that sacrifice and married, and it was a marriage of nothing. They hated each other. They could not get along. They used to argue. They would say hurtful things to each other. Zaynab could not accept the fact that he was a slave, an ex-slave. Plus, she thought he was extremely unattractive. And he couldn't stand the fact that Zaynab was conceited and arrogant and pompous. Zaynab told the Prophet he is not his religion. He's a good Muslim. He's religious. She said, but I can't stand him. Okay. And Zayd would go and complain to the Prophet, oh, Prophet of Allah, she's a good woman, a religious woman. She loves Allah, but I can't stand her. The Prophet would tell them both, stay together. Just stay married. Try to work it out, because you two are setting a precedent for the rest of the Muslims, who are the people who are converting. That marriage lasted less than a year. Finally, Zayd couldn't take it no more. So he told Zaynab, I divorce you. He gave her the words of divorce, and the Prophet didn't know it. But that day that Zayd gave Zaynab the words of divorce, Allah sent a revelation to the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah came and revealed to the Prophet in a dream through the angel Jibreel. He said, Zayd has divorced his wife Zaynab. So now I command you to marry her. Because Allah knew that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had originally wanted to marry her himself. But our Prophet made that sacrifice for the deen. Okay, to try to set a precedent, with his followers. And that's where we stopped off the last time we met. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam woke up from his dream shaking. And whose house was he at when he had this dream? He was at Salama's house. And he woke up shaking because, my goodness, how can I marry her? He was thinking. How can I marry her even though she's divorced when Zayd is my adopted son? It's haram to marry your son's ex-wife. So this is the dilemma that the Prophet found himself in. And even though Allah had revealed to him that he is now to be married to Zaynab, the Prophet didn't tell anyone, because he was like, what? Zayd is my son. So what happened? Let's put the PowerPoint up on the screen and take a look and see. Okay. So here we are. You guys should be able to see my screen. Hold on. Here we are at part 2 of the story of Zaynab Bint Jahsh, radiallahu anha. Okay. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam woke up from this revelation, and he refused to say anything about it to anyone, because he was like, what is this? How can I marry her when she's the ex-wife of my adopted son? This is when Allah sent down the revelation outlawing adoption. We have to understand, guys, we talked about this in our class yesterday. Before the advent of Islam, the Arabs used to adopt children. And after adopting them, that child would possess the same rights and authority as their real children, despite not being so. Even though there was no blood tie, this child would be called by the father's name. This child would also have the same rights to inheritance and marriage. However, this is not correct in accordance to Islam. So Allah sent down the words of the Quran at this moment, making adoption haram. So despite the repeated warnings of the Prophet for Zayd to stay married to Zaynab, he had divorced her. And Allah's revelation that he received when he was asleep said to marry her immediately after her iddat period is over. And Allah commanded the Prophet to marry her, and this marriage was to be performed without witnesses, without a guardian or a dowry. Allah just put the command out, marry her after her waiting period. So again, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam kept this to himself because he was worried about what would his followers say? What would the hypocrites say? Allah knew what the dilemma was that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was facing. And that's when Allah sent down this second revelation. Allah sent down the words where he says in the interpretation of the meaning, behold, you did say to one who had received the grace of Allah and your favor, keep her in marriage and fear Allah. But you hid in your heart that which Allah is about to make manifest. You fear the people, but instead you should fear me, Allah. And after Zayd has dissolved his marriage to her, we join her in marriage to you, so that in the future there will be no difficulty to the believers in regards to marriage with the wife of their adopted sons. So here you can see Allah let it be known in his second revelation. I have already married you to her, Muhammad. I know what you want in your heart. Don't worry. I have outlawed adoption. Adoption is bad. Adoption is dirty. It's not clean. You will set the precedence, just like you married her to Zayd to set the precedence that social status is of no value in Islam. You are now going to set the precedence that neither is adoption. Adoption doesn't exist no more. It's outlawed. So when Allah sent those verses down, the Prophet then announced what Allah had said. So here we can see this verse clearly states three things. Number one, from what happened here, we can see that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did his best to try to help Zayd and encourage Zayd to continue his marriage to Zaynab. He kept telling him over and over again to stick it out with her, but it just didn't work. Also, we see that even though Allah had told him that he was to marry Zaynab after her waiting period, the Prophet was worried about what people would say because of the adoption. Okay, which shows how caring our Prophet was. And then after Zayd had separated from his wife, Allah knew that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted to marry Zaynab. So Allah let it be known, you can marry her. And not only can you, but I'm marrying you to her. So that verse of the Quran is very important. It was a pivotal moment in our history. A pivotal moment in our history. And another pivotal moment occurred after their wedding. We'll talk about that next week. But this was a pivotal moment. Adoption was outlawed. Just like after the Battle of Uhud, Allah outlawed intoxicants, alcohol. Well, here we can see Allah is outlawing adoption. Okay. So what was the reaction? When the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam announced to the people after Zaynab's waiting period had passed, when the Prophet announced to the people that Zaynab was now his wife, of course, the people began to gossip. The enemies, the hypocrites began to slander him. In fact, some of the hypocrites said, look at Muhammad. Even though he knows that the wife of the son is forbidden for the father to marry, he has already married the wife of his own son. And when the people said that, that's when Allah sent down another verse. Allah sent down this third pivotal verse. He said, Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is not the father of any of your men. Instead, he is the messenger of Allah, and he is the seal of the prophets, and Allah has knowledge of all things. So Allah spoke up, and he spoke out to the slander that the hypocrites came up, letting it be known he ain't nobody's father. He ain't got no sons. All his sons died. Okay? Zayd's not his son. So we can see the Prophet was smart in keeping this a secret in the beginning. Okay? Because had he not, the people would have attacked him and thought he was crazy. But subhanallah, Allah vindicated him and spoke up quick, to let the people know he ain't nobody's father. His sons are all dead. Okay? Also, Allah says in the interpretation of the meaning, this is another verse that came down. This is a message sent down from the Lord of the worlds. And if the messenger were to invent anything, any sayings in our name, we should certainly seize him by his hand. And we should certainly then cut off the artery of his heart. Nor could any of you withhold him from our wrath. This is a message from Allah. So here, this whole incident proved to the unbelievers that the Quran, the Prophet Muhammad wasn't making up anything. The Quran is truly the words of Allah. The Prophet Muhammad couldn't read or write. We know that. So he didn't write nothing. And those were not his words. A lot of people converted to Islam. A lot of the unbelievers converted when these verses came down because they got to see his Lord is the Lord. His Lord is speaking. Because if Muhammad was making this up himself, he wouldn't admonish himself. If he was making this up himself, he would have did what he wanted to do and kept it a secret. So a lot of people converted to Islam after these verses came down. That's what made his marriage to Zaynab something that brought a lot of jealousy and animosity from Aisha, radiallahu anha. Because remember, Aisha used to brag and boast about how the revelations came with her and when she was with the Prophet and all this, and she was the only virgin. Well, now Zaynab was married to the Prophet without a witness, a dowry, or anything else by Allah. What a great honor that is. And Allah mentions the name of Zayd in the Quran. Zayd is the only companion's name that is mentioned in the Quran. That's how the people knew. These are the words of Allah. Okay? So all this proved to the people that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't making up anything. He wasn't just speaking out of his own desires or any of that. That indeed the Lord of the worlds was the one sending the revelations to him. And Aisha, radiallahu anha, tells us how this was a difficult time for the prophet. In fact, she tells us in an authentic hadith, she said, if the prophet would have hidden anything about the revelation that came to him, it would have been the verse about this marriage, because this marriage brought so much turmoil upon him. It was the proof that he didn't hide nothing of the revelations, and that the Quran was revealed strictly by Allah. Okay? So this is what happened. Adoption became outlawed as a result of this. Very pivotal moment for us. Okay? And also it proved that the revelations came from Allah, not from the prophet himself. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what happened? Well, the hypocrites, even today, let me share this with you guys. We got the hypocrites and the innovators out there who hate the prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's companions. They hate Aisha. They hate certain companions. They claim that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had one day seen Zaynab looking out of her window and she didn't have a hijab on, and he fell in love with her and wanted to marry her. So this is how this happened. This is a lie. The reason why it's a lie is, number one, Zaynab was his first cousin. They grew up together. He seen how she looked. He knew how she looked. Also, the verses about hijab were not sent down until after this. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. The abrogation of adoption. This was the first pivotal incident that occurred with the marriage. The second pivotal incident is the verses of hijab. They were sent down after this. Okay, so this is why when y'all look at those Shiites and other people of deviance, you know, lie on the prophet, lie on the companions, speak bad about the companions. They say that the prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw Zaynab without a hijab on and wanted her. Zaynab the women weren't wearing hijabs back then. Okay, the laws of hijab didn't come until after he had married her. So that's how we disprove them. They need to learn the history of the Quran, learn when each of those surahs and verses were sent down. Hijab came later. The women didn't have to cover up their bodies and hair at that time. So the prophet already knew how Zaynab looked. Plus, he grew up with her. He knew how beautiful she was. Everybody knew how beautiful she was. Just like everybody knew how beautiful Aisha was, how beautiful Salama was. The women didn't have to cover up back then at that point. Okay. Also, if the prophet really wanted to marry her so badly, he would have married her as a virgin. Remember, she was a virgin until she married Zayd. And she did not marry Zayd until she was 35 years old. So he could have, and her family had been saving her for him all these years anyway. He could have married Zaynab whenever he wanted. He could have married her when he, before he married Salama or the other ones. But he chose not to. Okay. So the marriage to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and to Zaynab came from Allah. Allah was the one that married them together, and this is something that Aisha radiallahu anha held over Zaynab's head, for years. So now we're going to talk about the wedding. Wait a minute, I'm hitting all these PowerPoints. Hold on, my computer. Hold on. The wedding. After receiving the revelation, The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent news to Zaynab. Her waiting period had ended. That's when he sent the news to her, letting her know that she and he had been married together by Allah. Some of the hadiths say that he sent the news to Zaynab through a servant named Selma. And there's other hadiths that say that it was Zayd. Zayd went and shared the news with Zaynab. But anyway, whichever ones are correct, Zaynab, when she heard the news that she was married to the Prophet by Allah, she was extremely happy. Because remember, she had been waiting all these years to be married to him anyway. She was so happy that she took all the jewelry that she was wearing and gave it to the person who brought her the news. And she swore an oath. She made an oath that she was going to fast for 2 months. And we'll talk about that next week too. But that's how happy she was. Okay. So they immediately had their wedding feast. And accordingly, when they had their wedding feast, this is when Allah, this is another pivotal moment in the marriage of Zaynab, Allah caused a miracle to happen. What happened was Sulaim, who was Anas ibn Malik's mother. I'm going to do her story for you guys later too. Sulaim, she brought a dish called haste, but she told the Prophet that it was only a little bit. She didn't have enough for everybody, but she knew it was something that he liked. The Prophet told her son, go to so-and-so and tell him to invite everyone he knows to come to this wedding feast. And tell them that they can invite whoever they want to. That's how excited the Prophet was to be marrying Zaynab. So Anas invited many of the people that the Prophet told him, and it ended up being 300 people that came to their wedding feast. And that little dish of haste that Sulaim made fed all of them. It was only enough for 3 or 4 people. But the miracle was that Allah allowed that little bit to feed all 300 people. Also, there's a hadith from Aisha radiallahu anha. Aisha radiallahu anha tells us all the Prophet's weddings, the wedding feasts were just milk. You know, they only had dates and milk. Zaynab's marriage was the only marriage in which they had meat. They had enough money for meat and other things too, because Zaynab was wealthy. She came from a very, very wealthy family. She was of Abdul Muttalib's family. Okay. And her family were so happy to finally marry her to who they were saving her for. So her family chipped in. They had lamb and sheep, and it was the biggest wedding that any of the wives ever had, because her family had all that money and paid for it. So that's where we're going to stop for today. I want y'all to remember her marriage was done by Allah. No witnesses, no guardian, no dowry needed. She was married by Allah to him because Allah knew that she was best for him. And we're going to talk about why. Zaynab was a dynamic woman. We're going to talk about why. You can imagine why. She was his first cousin. Half the blood that ran in him ran in her. Okay. So no witnesses, no guardian, just a nice big feast that fed 300 people. But after that wedding feast, other problems began. And Allah sent other pivotal revelations down. The next one being the hijab, as we just hinted on today. All right, so I'm going to stop right here. Any questions on the story of Zaynab? Any questions of this on this, what we talked about today with her story so far? Any questions or comments? Okay, if there's no questions or comments, let's go into our hadith for tonight. Y'all see I got the PowerPoint up there ready tonight. Our go ahead.
Sorry. You mentioned that Zayd was the only companion mentioned in the Quran?
By name.
By name. Okay.
Yeah. His name
that's all I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
Was there any other companion mentioned by name?
Not like that. Allah speaks about Abu Bakr and them, but never use their name. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And it's right in that surah. When you read that verse, it's Zayd, Zayd, his name is mentioned. Yeah. That was very pivotal.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sister Layla, I had a question.
Yes.
When Allah sent the Prophet ﷺ the revelation, did it come out his mouth? That's the reason why. That's why they was so shocked, because he said it out his mouth.
No. We talked about that in another class. When the Prophet Muhammad received revelations, he received them in dreams. That's one way. The revelations came to the Prophet in dreams, or Jibril would take on the appearance of a human being and give it to him. But nobody was sitting there with him like that. No, he wasn't talking to nobody. He was talking to Allah.
No, I understand that, because I remember you went over in the class. But my question was basically when he was saying it, because when he repeated it to the people.
No, he didn't. That's not what
okay.
He was at home in Salama's. He wasn't in front of people. He was at Salama's house when he received, sleeping. The Prophet was in his bed sleep when that revelation came, and he jumped up. He didn't tell the people. He didn't tell nobody. Remember, he hid it. He was afraid because he couldn't think, what, oh Allah, you want me to marry her? You marry me to her, but he's my son. So he didn't tell anybody about it. It went until, and then that's when Allah sent the other surah down after a little bit of time and said, look, I know that you afraid to give the revelation because you're afraid of what people are going to say. You better fear me and get out there. You're married. And that's when the Prophet went out and told the people, I'm married, after her waiting period was over. Her waiting period is 3 months or 3 menstrual cycles. After her 3 menstrual cycles, that's when the Prophet announced to the people after Fajr, me and Zaynab have been married by Allah. And he sent some hadith say he's told Zayd, go and inform Zaynab that Allah has married us. And other hadith say that he told Selma, who was a servant, go and tell Zaynab that me and her are married. So he didn't tell anybody at first. He kept it to himself. And I'm going to assume that he kept it to himself during that whole waiting period of hers, because he didn't announce it until after her waiting period was over. You understand now?
Yeah, but I was talking about when Allah said that he feared him as well. So I was saying that the part, if like say for instance, I forgot because I screen snapped it and I didn't. It's the one when Allah said that he would get a punishment for that, and then that's when the people started converting to Islam because he knew it wasn't his own words. It came from Allah, but I didn't. I screenshot when you said it. But
what are you talking about? You done totally.
Okay, let me go back.
What punishment? No, the verse where Allah was telling the Prophet, don't be concerned about what people have to say. The same thing I tell y'all. Don't care. It's about what I say. I have outlawed adoption. Adoption is not good and clean. It's illegal. So go and announce to the people that you're married. I married you to her. You're married. Don't care about their reaction. I got you, he was saying. And right when the Prophet announced it, the people started slandering. And that's when Allah sent another revelation and said, tell the people that ain't nobody your son. And that's when that one came down. Allah vindicated him. But I don't know so you got me messed up now. I don't know what you're talking about punishment. You understand? Does everybody else understand?
Yeah, I'm trying to find it. Let me get my words right. Hold on. I'm trying to find it. Trying to go back and look at my phone.
Okay, look at the PowerPoint.
Okay, on the PowerPoint where it says this is message, it was the blue one with the Quran writing on it.
Okay, I'm trying to get to it. What's wrong with this stupid thing? Oh, here it is.
The one right before, just before that one.
Wait a minute. Come on. Come on. Come on. The strength of these.
The last one right there.
This is
at the
a
bottom
message.
Where it says Muhammad.
This is a message sent down from the Lord of the worlds. And if the messenger were to invent any sayings in our name, we would certainly seize him by his right hand, and we should certainly cut out his artery, nor could any of you withhold him. Oh, in other words, this was Allah responding, telling him, don't fear the people. If the people accuse you, because that's what the prophet was afraid of. He was afraid of the people accusing him of wanting Zaynab for himself, of hiding words of the Quran from them, to twist it around like the people do today, to twist it around for themselves. And that's when the prophet, Allah sent this down, said, don't worry about them. Go and tell them that you don't have that power to invent any sayings against me. That if you should, I would take you out. In other words, this was again Allah vindicating the prophet, letting the people know that he doesn't, the prophet don't make the laws, because the people were upset. Why would he abolish? Why did Muhammad abolish adoption? We've been adopting kids for centuries. He gonna outlaw adoption just so he can marry Zaynab. You see what I'm saying? So that's when Allah said, you let them know you ain't got the power to abolish anything. I make the laws. I'm Allah. I make the rules. You don't make the rules. And I wouldn't allow anyone to do that. So this was what Allah told him to say, to the people. Yeah.
Okay.
Because that's what
that's what I was
thinking.
They
accused him of change. Oh, Muhammad is changing the book. Oh, Muhammad making his own religion. He just want to have sex. He wants Zaynab, blah, blah. You know how people do. So Allah said, don't fear them. Fear me. Go and tell them that you don't have that power. I'm the only one that had the power to make things lawful and unlawful. That's when all them verses came down too, by the way. Only Allah has the authority to make anything haram and anything lawful. The prophet doesn't even have that authority. So that's what Allah was saying. And if you were to try to change something, I would punish you. But the Prophet Muhammad wasn't that type of person who would do that. Y'all understand? Yeah, so that's Allah vindicating our prophet and speaking out for him, because he was afraid that the people would think that he changed the religion for himself. Because that's how the Arabs were. No, Sister Jamila, the hijab didn't come down to afterwards. We'll talk about the hijab next week. Wednesday. The verses of the hijab did not come down yet. At this point, women did not have to wear hijab. That's later. What came down now is no adoption. That's what y'all remember. Adoption was outlawed. Okay, that's the history of how adoption was outlawed. Zayd is not your son. He was adopted. Okay. Any other questions? All right, let's go to the next hadith. The hadith class. And I got that too in here. Let me go back to it. I put that on here. Hold on, let me get to that. All right, hold on. Okay, our hadith for tonight. This is from the book Beware. One hadith. This hadith warns against pointing a gun. or any weapon at another Muslim. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, none of you should point a weapon at his brother or sister in Islam, because you don't know whether perhaps the shaitan may draw it out while it's in your hand. And as a result, you will end up hurting someone, and you will end up falling into a pit in hell. Because, you know, this, again, what are the three things that are sacred? Honor, life, and property. Look how many children nowadays play with guns or play with knives, and somebody gets killed. The gun goes off. The knife ends up hitting you in your throat. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has forbidden us from pointing a weapon at another person, because you can accidentally kill that person. And again, what is that? That's capital punishment. That's your life. That's qisas. That's an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. That's blood money. Okay, that's the hellfire. So this is a hadith we need to teach our children. And this is Bukhari and Muslim. So we learn here the Islamic law is all about keeping us safe, protecting us. And as Muslims, we should prioritize our other Muslims and their safety. And we don't play and joke around with dangerous things. In fact, we should stay away from anything that can lead to harm. And we must always think about the consequences of our actions before we do them. And remember, Shaitan will always seize every opportunity to try to take us to the hellfire. So don't open the door to that. Don't play with knives. Don't play with guns. Don't play with stuff like that and point it at other people. And you end up taking somebody's life or severing a limb, and you have to pay the blood money or do the qisas for it. Like I told y'all, life, honor, property. Those are the three things that we ain't got to give you no forgiveness for. Ain't no forgiveness for taking my son's hand. I want your hand now and the blood money. Okay. All right. Any questions about that hadith?